capacities of digital technology, we have the panel concerned with what a global digital mathematics library might be. It's supposed to be an update on this. Now, what we have is apparently a demonstration of the difficulties with this technology. For instance, he's going to, I think, double the size. And that's overdoing it. And then, okay. And then we will have manual advancement of the slides instead of using this. Please go ahead. What? The next slide names those of us up here, which is a problem. Misra, Onshuus, Zheng, and Thierry Bouche. And in order to get on with it, if we now launch straight on to the remarks by Stephen Watt, by going the next slide, you will find a title slide for Stephen. That's what we want. Who, as you see, is from the University of Waterloo in Ontario, Canada, and has various good reasons to be interested in this sort of thing. I hope he'll demonstrate that by coming up now and doing this sort of thing for the next 8.5 minutes.
Thank you, Patrick. The next slide, please. So this is not, okay, perhaps we go full screen then. This seems to be on the right size. How's it supposed to work? All right, so this is to give an update on the International Mathematical Knowledge Trust and where we're at with respect to the Global Digital Math Library. If we could go to full screen, please. I think that this is now going to be working. Hello, technician, are you able to switch to full screen, please? All right. All right, so in that case, we'll make the best of what we can do here. To begin with, I'd like to point out how mathematical knowledge is of a particularly different nature than we would see with other fields. If we have a mathematical statement that is true, it remains true over time. It's not as some results in medicine or chemistry where our state of knowledge evolves. Yes, our state of knowledge evolves, but it doesn't invalidate old knowledge. And most mathematical statements can be represented exactly, and treated mechanically. So for example, our 2 times 3 times 7 equals 42 remains, it will always be true. Next slide, please. Okay, this is going to be a little bit difficult to with the screen flashing here. So the notion of having a global digital math library has been a long-standing vision. It's had many advocates over time, dating back some more than 20 years. Some of the long-standing advocates are here in the room today. The initial vision was to have this digital math library as a linked digitization of much or all of the past mathematical literature in an enhanced open archive of articles. And if you look at the size of this work, it's something on the order of 10 to the 6 to 10 to the 7 items, depending on what you count. And we might think that that's an incredibly large amount of material. But if you think of things like Google Street View and so on, we would have thought just a few years ago that it would be crazy to imagine having photographs of all of the streets on the planet. Next slide, please. The the IMU, under Ingrid Deveshi's leadership, Ingrid is right here, at the Seoul ICM, the photo of which you see symbolically there, Ingrid brought together a number of people to look at advancing this question of how do we build or how do we get this global digital math library out of the imagination and into the real world. Next slide, please. These are some of the people who were involved and in the working group that was formed. Next slide, please. The remit of this group was essentially to design a roadmap and figure out how to get things done, from organizational structure to prioritization to understanding what would be the budgetary aspects, what would be some kind of sustainable funding, and to actually get some initial seed funding. Next slide, please. And so the working group has, from its launch, and this was 4 years ago, undertook met on a regular basis to lay out some plans about where to go. It was decided to form a not-for-profit organization that would act as a host for many of the activities and as a coordinating body and a point of reference for those who wished to participate. The working group went off to secure some seed funding to actually go and create this not-for-profit organization, to create a website, to give various different presentations at conferences, to host some workshops to further the goals of, to figure out exactly what needs to be done and so on, and actually to define some seed projects. Next slide, please. So if you go to imkt.org, you'll see something like this. Yes, there's a website. Next slide, please. And so the not-for-profit organization has been formed. It's been initially supported by the University of Waterloo and the Alfred P. Sloan Foundation. Next slide, please. The initial board of directors is made up of the people you see here, some of whom you will recognize. Others are coming from different walks of life, including philanthropic work, those who have legal experience and experience in setting up organizations like this. Next slide, please. Now, so let's talk about what we actually want to be doing and what our intentions are. This picture here is an image of what we used to think the future might look like. And if you go look at old science fiction magazines and so on, you'll see some pretty funny ideas of what we think the future should be. Now, back 20 years ago, 25 years ago, the idea of having a comprehensive linked set of online articles seemed pretty ambitious, and now it's actually quite, it's not really very ambitious. Indeed, we're largely there. The initial works in this Global Digital Math Library direction were about assembling collections of literature, of having the correct infrastructure to be able to access the articles, and that work has come a long, long way in the meantime. But what else do we want to be doing? So where are we right now? Next slide, please. So we have many high-quality article repositories now, from archives of commercial publishers and professional societies, through to archives where the authors themselves contribute articles, or those that have been curated. We have Thierry Bouche here, who's been very active in this area, and perhaps he'll say some things about EUDML later. Next slide, please. We have a number of additional services relating to reviewing, indexing databases about different sorts of library science types of things, but also about authors. So for example, the Math Genealogy Project or Google Scholar, so on, you can find many interesting things about the literature itself. Next slide, please. We have some very useful summary works, whether we look at the Wikipedia Mathematics Project, for example, something that's a sort of a collective effort that is of a self-organized group, or whether we look at such hand-curated summary work such as the Math World Wolfram site or the Special Function site. These are, we have, for example, here the digital repository of math formula, the DRMF, that has been developed at NIST in the United States. The Digital Library of Mathematical Functions, another very high quality collection of mathematical results. Next slide, please. And then we have a number of specialized tools and databases. For time, I won't go into the details here, but you can see that these are collections of mathematical objects. We've heard about this a little bit in the previous panel. Everything from the Encyclopedia of Triangle Centers to online Encyclopedia of Integer Sequences and so on and so forth. So now we're starting to get not just collections of articles, but information from the literature in a form that is actual data that's machine usable. Next slide, please. And we talked about big proofs, and we heard about big proofs in the last panel. And indeed, we have much mathematical knowledge that is captured in the libraries that are developed in order to put together these large proof objects. Next slide, please. And there are a number of other projects and activities, some which are quite involved. For example, the encyclopedia, an example we can look at here is this Encyclopedia of Continued Fractions, where Eric Weisstein and Michael Trott and some people they worked with did a comprehensive survey on the literature of continued fractions in order to produce a curated knowledge base about continued fractions. Next slide, please. Now, we've seen that what we're doing is we're hoisting up the semantic level of what we're looking at from the initial idea of a collection of page images with sufficient indexing and ways to get at the articles themselves, through to analyzing the content of the articles, to actually having to capture the semantics of what's being said in these articles, and I would argue to actually do corpus analysis of the whole literature or significant subsets thereof. So we're moving from the initial concept of article collections as a digital math library through to a knowledge base and knowledge management tools. Next slide, please. So this is reminiscent. So we look at the whole mathematical literature. You see how each paper is built on other ones. We have this picture at the bottom looks like a forest, but it's actually a single organism in Utah that consists of about 50,000 things that look like trees, but they're actually sprouts of one large connected root system. And that's a little bit what our mathematical literature is like. If you start pulling on one paper, you need the results of things that are related to. And so if you want to be able to build a semantic model of that you want to capture the semantics of the mathematical literature, then you need to anticipate that you're going to have to pull up the whole forest if you start pulling on one tree. So next slide, please. And so the IMKT, this International Mathematical Knowledge Trust, takes the view of what are the essential parts of what we're going to need to do this. So here are the 4 seed projects that have been funded or have been defined, and the seed funding is available. The first is the Formal Abstracts Project, which is being run by Tom Hales. The concept there is not to give a formal proofs of every statement in every paper in the literature, but rather to identify what are the main statements and main results in each paper, and to be able just to have a clear, formalized statement of those theorems, to have clear definitions of what are the objects involved. It's still a massive undertaking. This is supported by the Sloan Foundation. I believe that So actually, for time, I won't go into many details, but we can answer questions about this later. The other projects range from relating different formal systems to relating different collections of objects. For example, it was mentioned earlier about how some special functions don't exactly line up. If you have a definition in one computer algebra system versus some numerical library versus some article, that there can be subtle differences in sign conventions, branch cuts, order of arguments, in many things. And the last of the seed projects there is relates to mathematical document classification as a first step towards knowledge extraction. So next slide, please. The main point here is that there are indeed many separate groups working independently, and the groups, the problem is so vast that we cannot have expect one group to take care of all of it, to handle all of it, but rather we have to be able to relate the works of different groups in some kind of a precise, machine, understandable way. And so if each of those boxes is formalizing a part of literature and those blue circles are theorems, then we have to have other theorems that relate the collection of work that are being done by the different groups. Next slide, please. We also have to be able to trust in the future, and I think that we've been right to make that bet, and it's starting to pay off. Of course, we can hand curate a small seed aspect of literature, a small subset. But as we have improvements in machine learning and artificial intelligence, we can move to supervised learning in classification and extraction of mathematical facts from these documents. And notice that we cannot formalize all literature because some of the literature is wrong. And so we have to look at extracting correct facts from the literature. And in this, the question is exactly how formal can you get and do you want to get? A little bit of inaccuracy can go a long way in terms of being able to have perfectly usable statements about a lot of the literature. And of course, once we extract the data, then we have to future-proof it so it can be usable well into the future. Next slide, please. The main point that I'd like to make here is summarized by these three pictures. I think that most people here will recognize the logo for Wikipedia. Does anybody recognize the top logo about Nupedia? Has anybody ever heard of Nupedia before? This was James Whale's first effort, which was to be a curated encyclopedia written by experts. And it got so bogged down that after 4 years, they closed it down. Indeed, the question that we have to look at is, what is the return on investment, the return on effort for individuals to want to participate in such an activity? And indeed, the mechanics, that's one of the main issues for the IMKT that I think that we've come a long way towards, and that is, how is it that we make it worthwhile for individuals to participate and for publishers to participate? There's been a lot of worrying about copyrights, for example, with for-profit publishers, and how do we get access to that part of the literature? Well, the answer is not to go and plead and convince them to release their back files, but rather to make it in their self-interest to do so. So that last picture there is from the movie Field of Dreams. If you build it, they will come. That's not true. First of all, you have to make it worthwhile for them to come. So thank you.
Thanks. Yeah, thank you very much. I'll try to be brief. I was told to give an account of efforts in India involving archival sort of activities relating not just to mathematics. In India, it's necessarily often includes other sciences. We can essentially skip the first two slides because I was going to remind you about 25 years ago what we thought the archives might look like. So may we go to the third slide? There was a declaration of. Right. But we need to move to the next slide. Oh, okay. Can we go to the next slide, please? Yeah. Well, I did say it, no? Yeah, okay. This was supposed to be the view of the archives, which stored preprints for, for the future, and it was supposed to be an open access system. Please, let's have the next slide. There was a declaration of the National Institute of Health from about 25 years ago. I put it up here only to say that not much has changed. Our goals are the same. It's just that the technology has improved a lot more so that the archives are able to store many more papers, and the access to these is much easier today. And can we have the next slide, please? Yeah, right. The next slide again. Yeah, right. The archive, right. Next slide. Yeah. So the 25 years or so that we have been used to the archive, it has grown in size. It initially started with a physics archive and the math in two separate places. Can we have the next slide, please? Yeah, so this originated in Los Alamos and then the Duke University for mathematics, but let's have the next slide. Then they were combined, and they are now together at Cornell University. The reason for my telling you this is that we have a mirror site. Let's have the next slide, please. The Institute of Mathematical Sciences, which is in Chennai, actually has a mirror site set up right from the beginning, more or less after a couple of years of the archive was conceived. Mirror site was set up in Math Science, and it has been functioning since then quite well, actually. Let's have the next slide. So the mirror is connected to the internet with sufficiently high-speed link, and it remains up to date within about a lag time of about 20 or 30 minutes. Let's have the next slide. Next slide, please. And the government has invested enough money and manpower to make sure that not only that we are connected, but it remains up and running, and the expectation is that even for the next many years to come, there is enough storage space and so on and so forth. So let's have the next slide, please. So there is a new effort that just got started in India called Open Access India. They have actually just set up a new committee to actually manage the archive, but this archive is going to be all sciences, not just mathematics. It's going to sort of become functional in over the next couple of months. The governing council has been just set up. Let's have the next slide. Yeah, this is an open access repository that has been set up by the Indian Academy of Sciences. It stores all the papers of the fellows of the Indian Academy. Let's have the next slide, please. There is another archive also set up at the Indian Institute of Science, again meant for the papers and the research output of the faculty of that institute. Let's have the next slide, please. I was going to talk about episciences.org. This is a new effort which is not exactly an archival effort, but it sort of hosts existing journals and then also serves as an overlay journal. But if you just go to episciences.org, you will see the effort that's on in this regard. Let's have the next slide, please. One of the journals from India, for example, is hosted on Episciences, the Hari Ramanujan journal. Let's have the next slide, please. Next slide, please. Yeah. So yeah, this is just a schematic description of how this is supposed to work. Let's go to the next slide. Next slide, yeah. Now, I want to finish by just saying that I have been concerned about all these efforts. Often what happens is if there isn't the administrative and the academic leadership matching with all these open source efforts, it sometimes becomes very difficult for the younger colleagues to actually put their stuff here as soon as they are available. So we have been making an effort to actually encourage the administrative arms to come together and say that papers that are stored or deposited in these repositories will have to be taken seriously. So this is one such declaration by the Open Access India community. Let's have the next slide, please. And what is very satisfying is that the Indian Academy of Sciences, which is one of the most influential sort of organizations in India, after a lot of debate in several council meetings, produced a long document, but the overriding part is that it's a recommendation to the government saying that papers that are deposited in these archives will have to be taken seriously by the science administrators. Thank you very much.
All right, so my name is Onshuus. I come from Colombia, Universidad de los Andes, and I was tasked to find developments, initiatives, and needs from developing countries related to the GDML, and I didn't know much about it, but I tried. So I'm reporting on the conversations I had about these things. Next slide, please. And next slide. Next slide. So let me first tell you a little bit about how we access content in this moment. So in most universities, of course there are some, but most universities don't have good enough subscriptions to the main mathematical journals. So how do we access the mathematical knowledge? We are based in personal contacts, like favors. Many people have alumni access to alma mater. We're still, most of the researchers in developing countries have had their PhDs abroad, so there's another way, and we have some library agreements. Of course, archive has become one of the very mainstream tool, and one thing that surprised me, because I asked specifically about it, is that internet access and speed, which was ongoing issue some years ago in conversations that I had in other panels, it just didn't seem to be an issue right now. So I think that the speed in downloading is going to, it's increasing faster than anything else that we're trying out. Next slide, please. We have also some library agreements for sharing journal articles, and we have joint access to MathSciNet from some universities, and one thing that is not here that I found out, realized yesterday, and is that many of our mathematical societies have own journals that are free of charge and have open access for everyone, and so we are working a little bit towards open access just by taking things to the mathematical societies. Next slide, please. One thing that I realized, and I hadn't thought of this, and I don't know if you've heard about the German idea for gold open standard, and for many people, well, not many people that did bring this up, they seem to be trying to change a model from a pay to read to a pay to publish, and this is something that would have strong consequence for us, or at least people are a little uneasy about it, so something to think about. Next slide, please. So now I want to tell you a couple of quotes that people sent me. One was, it would be great to have access to information at more basic levels than what is found in archive, for example, to support a graduate student in Cambodia or Honduras. I've not explored what is available, but what I have seen is at the level of research that a student and most teachers in many developing countries could not read. Something that would be of special interest at the level of developing countries would be to have documents edited by experts on how one enters some areas of research. And I got similar quote from two people, and what I find funny is that this is the reason I'm here. Like when they asked me what I wanted, this is more or less what I said, and I think it's why Patrick was insisting on me coming here for this panel. So, but there is a good answer for this. So if people are interested, there is American Institute of Mathematics has an open textbook initiative, and I think this is, I mean, it's small, but it's good, and it seems to be growing well. So in case people are interested, this is a good place to look into. Next slide, please. This is the last one. So there are a couple more replies. Like I got many people saying that it should be open access, and one thing to explore is to map the mathematical knowledge, understanding, for example, how many written articles are in the interface of two subfields. And it would be important to discuss first the balance between novelty and soundness, number of publications, the quality, and open source and funding for these purposes. And if you've heard what Stephen showed, this is, I think, basically the questions that people are thinking and developing towards GDML. So from our side, I think you're doing in the right direction. So thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm delighted to be here, reply the Chinese library group. First, I will introduce myself. I'm not majoring in math. I think maybe this is the only one. I'm studying in information and science. I have got my PhD. I have 10 years for collection, management, and information organization. And now I'm studying and researching in how to organization the information to survivors in different domains. So this is where my research. Today I will give a very brief overview of mathematics in China and mathematical library in China and how we view from China community. So next slide. Then next. A little small. The first, let's look at math in China. The number of the graduate with a degree in mathematical, you can see in the table. We have every year have 1,000 doctor, 6,000 master, or something like bachelor. In university and research institute studied in mathematics, the number is here. From five years statistics, we found the number of master degree awarded was degree from 7,000 to 6,000. But according to the division of the discipline of studies, there are five of master and PhD degree. The most one is applied mathematics and the basic mathematics. Next slide. Okay. The mathematical research. The article of journal is the main outcome of the scientific research. According to the journal published, the article published in the Web of Science, the Chinese research published increased every years, but the funding of the mathematical research is 500 million yuan by NSF of China. You can see the table, how was the funding, the funding, the total percent. Then next. In the view of the above situation, you may know the mathematics in China, but the digital mathematical library in China, we didn't have the special digital math library. We all dependent on electro database subscribed. We have a virtual library alliance such as an NSTL, Catalyst, which provided all of the connections for all the users in China. For help the researcher, we construct a math library homepage such like this, and the subject portals, and supplies article, journals, theses, some events, and some others. And we also make the electro journal navigation is the second one. We all have a China archive and in prevent plan form, and some university and research institute, they also build institute repository, but the number, the research in math, give the paper is very small. You can see that in this subject is only 30 papers in math. Next. Patrick asked me a question, how we want to get from the global digital math library and how we can do for it. So this is what I thinking. The first things I thinking and asked someone researched in mathematics. He's thinking the most important thing is decreasing in timing for retrieval and discovery. He will find things in different database and get the pool papers. So thinking is a waste of time, and sometimes he forgotten to funding. So he didn't know the research is done by someone. So the same and avoid. So another is understanding the programs of a similar research topic. He wants to know who researches the same and how is the programs of them. Then another is introduce the Chinese research result to international peers and promoting the mathematical research. This is what we're thinking, get and hope to help this job. Next. And other things we were thinking, what the global digital mathematics like? Is digitalization of a physical library, or he is a database or like something. So we look at the other subject, and some like materials, some of nano, or some of NIH of health. We found a change in these years. Sometimes we are researching by searching by article name or by the author, by the journal. This is all about the document, but the document retrieval is not the digital library in the future. So we were thinking, how about the knowledge structure, something like spring materials? He can search by elements, searching by the structure, searching by crossing search, and we will say nano. He will searching and property, size, and application. Maybe in math, we can search by forum and who use it. So this is a big change, and how we tell people the topic, but not talk them about, oh, I have a paper, or I have a document, or I have a book. So this is maybe a change about digital library. So we can change from the document retrieval to domain knowledge structure discover. Maybe we need to build a knowledge graph in math. But how to build it, and how can we do this in the future? This is we will try to thinking next. Next slide. Okay, I thinking we'll go the 3 steps. The first is integrate and share warehouse. This is it's very important things. We will connection all about the documents such as the journal, proceeding, monograph, textbook, theory papers, a lot of things. This is basic data. Oh, okay, then we will receive some dictionary, some materials, some concept all about this. Then the second is the relation network of mathematical research. We will research the unit or who do the mathematical research, some university, college, institution, and all of the person who studied in math, who used in math, and who will work with the math. And some tools, who make the tools for mathematics. All of the person, they can connect with the relation map. So we can build 2 entities. One is the domain, and other is a general entity. The general entity is like all subject. Maybe they organize this with documented person, institution, tools, and the special one is the domain. How is the math domain entity we can build? Which can conclude in it? Maybe formulas, mathematical models, or philosophy, mathematics. This is a big question. We're thinking we can research this in the future, so we can connect the concept, relation, and connect all of them and show the people who use it, how to use it, and how the program in the future. So this is the future I thinking about mathematics digital library. This is my speaking. Thank you for listening.
Okay, yes, I am from the University Grenoble. Sometimes school with an accent, but it's not. Please go ahead. Next slide. Yes, next slide, please. Yes, yeah. we do not do exactly the same side. So, yes, so back to the basics, I would say. I'm mainly interested here, I'm supposed to represent the European point of view about DML, and in Europe we did something, which is the UDML project. And the UDML project was mainly concerned with integrating global European digital library. European doesn't mean a lot. In this case, European is mainly because we got some European funding and we assembled collections that were hosted in Europe. But most of the mathematical collection of journals, etc., have international authors, and mathematics is universal, etc. So you don't have to care too much about Europe in this question. So just back to the basic, what is a library? It's I took that from a course, I think, in second year in library studies. You select collections. Making a library is selecting collections, then you acquire the material, then you make a catalog, so that you index your collections, and then you take care of the preservation of these things over the very long time, and you take care of the access provision, which sometimes collides with archiving and preservation, but that's another question, for patrons. And so that's it. Digital library is a collection of original reference documents that are useful to specific user base, and that should be available for everybody. Next slide, please. So UDML, the historical version of what the DML should be, and the UDML project was based on the idea that, well, we do have a network of paper libraries around the world where more or less we have the kind of documents we need in our work. And that's it. I mean, we just want to get the same function. The digital media should help us have a better service and worldwide availability, not only to people locally near to some library. And so just take advantage of that and go on and create the library that every mathematician with an internet connection worldwide needs. We don't have to live with the limitations of the past. Okay, so next, please. So UDML, yes, was a project that is now finished, and well, it's not dead. We created a system that does exist. The content that is in that system is updated, but slowly, and just coming from the partners, the original partners in the project. Which made quite a number of things available. And from GDML, for the basic layer content, we would like to just go on in this activity, and in order to get worldwide content from all possible partners of such a project, and there are many of them, and then possibly add more advanced layers on top of the content. Next, please. So, summary of what I said, more or less, is written on that slide. And given that I am supposed to have two, we can go directly to the next one. Yes, so these are figures. Well, just one thing here. So I am in the same range than what Stephen said, so at least we are compatible. One thing that is quite often overlooked is that the corpus, if you're talking of the reference corpus of written mathematics in the Occidental tradition, let's say, or I'm not necessarily, maybe we should not restrict to the Occidental tradition, but at least, let's say, from Euclid, then it has been written in many languages, and we have to take care of that. Of course, starting somewhere in the 20th century, most of the mathematics was written in English, but when you're looking at the whole corpus, you have to take care of the many languages in which the math is written. Next slide, please. Yes, this slide is just a teaser, because we always, when we are discussing these things, and it was the case with my fellow panelists, we always discuss, well, what is a DML? So my understanding of DML is that it's a library, and a library contains trusted material that has been published with peer review, etc., so that these are the references for further work, and so that we can build mathematics as a cumulative knowledge. And any collection of any math-related document, a wrong theorem is a math-related document. I think we should. So this is the selection part of the library. We have not to store anything in that library. So I think we have to keep in mind all of these things might be interesting and are useful at different stage in the research process or for different documents at different stage of the work. But we have to keep in mind that it's not the same thing, a digital library and a repository where people just put what they want to put, and without moderation, a trusted archive versus an encyclopedia, it's not the same thing. In one case, you have the source, but you don't have the cook knowledge on top of this source. An encyclopedia summarizes things and might be very useful and efficient. And you can generate possibly encyclopedia on top of the raw resource, but you need both, and they do not serve the same purpose. And, well, as big data is quite fancy today, if we just use big data techniques over the mathematical corpus, there is a risk that we end up with a very high level and retrieval, for instance, or high level, very powerful tools in order to retrieve wrong or approximate theorems. So just want to point out these possible problems. Next slide, please. It's the same, so maybe. Yes, but my conclusion on this topic of DML, on the content in the DML, is that there has not been any interesting advance in this area since, let's say, 4 years, because we talked about this in Seoul, and the slide I had to make were more or less the same. So this is the main problem. Regarding the content, the DML project was generated a lot of activity around year 2000, then it accumulating in some sense with UDML, and since the UDML project funding stopped, more or less nothing happened. Very few things happened. And although there are people, maybe even in this room, who could contribute content to such a library, and there are around many things available that could be aggregated, it's a problem. Next slide, please. I don't remember. And then I will take my... So I finished the DML part. The question is about open access. Okay, so I was asked to talk about two subjects, which are related, but not so much, in fact. And so the DML, as I described it, should be something, well, our idea is that things should be freely available, but it's as well in the logic of a long term, having a moving wall is not a strong problem. So digital library should be something that is eventually open access, but not necessarily instant open access to everything, so that we can cope with different models, etc. So that was the way the DML was designed, and the IMU supported it by different communications. But now, what can we say about open access to the current mathematical literature, which is more in the publishing area? So I try to summarize what seems to be the consensus in the mathematical community. Well, I'm chairing a committee of the European Mathematical Society where we try to sort out these questions, and we recently emitted a statement on open access from the EMS whose main point is just we don't want, so please, next slide, which is the same slide but completed. So the general, the result of our consultation, but it seems quite obvious that mathematicians are more or less favorable to general open access to whatever is published currently in mathematics and of good quality, but not at any cost. And when I say this, you have to think that the cost, the possible costs of going to open access, or publishing everything open access, might be, of course, people are thinking about the APC or article processing charge, etc., as a cost, and many people in the community do not want to pay for publishing. But there are other costs. There are environmental costs, societal costs, and please, next slide. It was supposed to be actioned continuously. Next slide. So it will be easier that way. So so people like the idea of open access generally. They don't like the idea of paying APCs. And just a side remark, reasonably priced subscription journals are better than crap open access journals. And that's something, sometimes in discussion about open access, people are so obsessed with open access that they forget that the end should be good journals with good papers and good quality, a good quality publishing system, and that this has a cost, and the cost has to be covered in some way. And maybe it's not by imposing a generic model before we know whether it's working or not that that is a good option in order to go ahead. So here are just the things, okay, people don't like APCs. We really have the problem which is currently entirely left out of how does it work for learned societies. In principle, learned societies are the publishers that are more friendly to mathematical authors, understand them best. And they had this tradition to get money from publication, and now if they go open access, they have to find a way, if they agree, to find the money in order to publish. And the function of publishing changed a little bit. And that's a real problem, and currently, well, if we have a mandate, everything should be in open access, then a number of things should change, and there is no current solution about that. So maybe I'll stop here.
Thank you, Thierry. I'd like to thank the panelists all for operating well under unexpected conditions. So thank you very much. Now we have about the half hour that we expected for questions from the floor. If those who would wish to ask them would declare themselves, please. Questions?
Is it okay?
I don't need the microphone.
Oh.
Yes,
you
but
do need the microphone.
But I have the microphone and I would like to use it if you don't mind. Thank you very much. So, Catherine Goldstein from Paris. I have a concern about a lot of digital material which is already so available but somehow closed to many of us. Just to give an example, for instance, HathiTrust, they have a lot of digital material, digital journals in mathematics, and it's not possible to have access to the entire journal except if you are in the States. In a university in the States. So I wondered how you have the project to deal with that. Do you want to re-digitalize all these things? Do you want to get permission to use the material and open it? How do you plan to deal with this problem? HathiTrust is just one example, but I have others.
So, oh good, the microphone is working. Very good. So this is a question that on which we've seen some movement in recent years. We've had participation, now it's by no means solved, that there are publishing conglomerates, as it were, that are publishers that are aggregating copyrights in a somewhat dangerous way, but at the same time wish to remain relevant. We see, of course, what Thierry was referring to, the most recent events in Germany. But at the same time, we have some publishers, for example, we had Springer Nature at one of our previous sessions, where they were making a very concerted effort to support open access of the material. And we have authors who are somehow wedded to a current system where they and their institutions are not bearing costs. And so there are costs in there are costs that need to be recognized and supported. And so the publishers are certainly not going to willingly let go of much profit and are not going to be sort of just volunteering unless it's in their own interest. I think that the lucky aspect that we have is that mathematical knowledge is different in another way than the ones I said, and that is it's not as profitable as medical knowledge or chemical knowledge or so on. And so we see publishers that are willing to let, after a time of a couple of years, for those articles to become available outside of their paywalled sites. And so this is a work in progress. But I think that its attitudes of both the authors and of the publishers do need to evolve. We're certainly quite far from there today, but we do see some movement.
Yes, perhaps.
Gerard Passman from the United States. I see a lot of good work being done here, but I also see a lot of looking back. There's a lot of current work being done on currently open access electronic journals, like, for example, Gower's recent announcement and similar works. And I'm not seeing that mentioned up here in the presentation about support and curation for those. There are also other sources of things where mathematicians actually discuss things on forums, and it turns out there's a wealth of information on there. I'm not seeing that being discussed here either, possibly because it doesn't fall under curated material, but there is material there worth curating. It would be nice to see an idea of looking to the future, how you would support these sources of information that you're going to have to consider in a few years anyway.
You're quite right. There is, in fact, a wealth of other information. Thierry began to discuss open access. This could, of course, have been a panel on open access questions because a lot's been going on recently. It's not that the GDML effort is unaware of it, but we don't have, the situation is not completely shaken out yet. You'll agree to that, I think, as well. It was also important here to emphasize the global aspect of the GDML effort, and we were concentrating on that. But indeed, you're quite right. There's a lot of new stuff from Fair Open Access and Math OA to other efforts that you mentioned, like those from the Gowers Quarter and others. There are all sorts of other publishing efforts too, which I think I don't consider as benevolent. We also haven't been discussing those, but you're quite right.
So do I take it that the committee and the board and the bodies are looking at these and hoping to find an answer to those as well?
You would be right in that.
Thank you.
Any other more comments? Over there.
There is Marie Farge. Concerning open access, the present practice with a publisher who are asking for article processing charge. I have experience myself just very recently for the last paper I have published with some co-author. We were ready to pay IPCs, and, but we discovered, and to our great surprise, that we were required actually to give our copyright away. And now that our paper is published, though it's a paper in a journal, I'm not going to mention the publisher here, I can keep that for private, because many publishers do that. It's not an exception, this one. What do? They ask you IPC for a journal which is by subscription, so it's a hybrid journal, and in addition, we have to give away our copyright, and now the paper is published under the copyright of the publisher. And in fact, it's illegal, because when I sign the copyright transfer form, I have crossed. I gave the copyright, but only non-exclusively. I cross it. But then, anyways, they publish with their owning the copyright. Though, my point is, and it's a question to the group, can we manage to get good lawyers on our side to analyze case studies like that? Because I think now, as you know, many commercial publishers are much too strong on those legal issues, and as a result, they just impose their own model in a very illegal way. I mean, but I have no one to help me to defend myself. I'm ready to make a case with this example, but which lawyer who I can ask for this kind of support? Because in front of me, I will have really strong companies with strong lawyers. This kind of misbehavior at legal level happen a lot, and we have to denounce it. But what do you think?
So there'll be two parts to answer this question. I think that I would like to. You have a lot of experience, Thierry, in working with different from your UDML time in dealing with different publishers and different back files. But the Knowledge Trust has focused primarily on some of the technical aspects, but recognizes that the copyright aggregators we must find a way for the for-profit publishers to have it in their best interest to participate. I'd mentioned earlier that the business of mathematical publishing is a small part of the companies such as Elsevier and so on. Google won't even put MathML into Chrome because they feel the mathematics is not important for their business. So I think that the leverage that we can offer is that it actually drives more traffic to the publisher's site for them to allow access to their articles. Now, in terms of the specific question of, will the IMKT be a copyright advocacy organization? That's not the principal purpose. It's certainly there are a number of concerned individuals and groups who are fighting that fight, and I think that our idea is to be able to support the technical side while offering, while attempting to construct mechanisms that make it in publishers' best interest to participate. Thierry, did you want to add to this?
Yeah, I think what's happening with publishing is an ongoing discussion in the IMU, and I know that there are initiatives to have good practices, standards, and all those things should be included in bad practices. But yeah, I think that IMU might be the place that you can find some help, or at least get something going for good practices, because that's where it's being discussed, the EC. So, yeah.
General questions of how the mathematical community should or may react to demands from publishers of any sort for transfer of copyright, and why. Surely more matters for this IMU CAIC and considerations of best practices. The Global Digital Math Library's concern is to try and facilitate access to mathematics all over the world. That's perhaps an issue there, but it's not one that the IMKT is going to consider, I think.
But the IMKT could be a collection of such information, not necessarily being applicable. I could go somewhere and say, oh yeah, someone else is at this from. Talk to that.
Thank you for the suggestion.
I just want to add that there are a lot of lawyers working, a lot of good lawyers working on licensing, and there are lots of licenses being put out, CC and many other ones. It's a matter of either pushing or advocating for journals and publications in general to adopt certain standard licenses and license work that have been done out there already. The other one is that one may need to review the idea that the IMU may be a source for much of that information on those policies. Every author here, I'm one of the editors of the proceedings, and every author here has been forced to sign a copyright agreement, which is quite draconian and not so forgiving as a CC agreement.
I think the discussions in the community and with the bodies in the mathematical community are far from over. We're not all of the same mind, in fact. There are certainly authors who are, particularly book authors, who are very interested in the revenues provided by copyright, though most of us probably aren't. We're rather on the article end than the book end.
James Davenport, Bath. Alf in particular made the point that archive is a very important source of information, but there's a distressing tendency among mathematicians who do use archive to leave on archive the old version of their paper and not to update it to match the published version. This may be a trivial updating. It may be slightly more serious for the user in terms of equation numbers changing and so on, but it may actually be fundamental. I've seen, I've been bitten by papers on archive which are wrong. The published paper is right, but the one on archive is wrong and has not been corrected. This is perhaps a tendency we should be careful to watch out for and perhaps warn against.
The longitudinal tracking of items exists, of course, also for papers that have been formally refereed and published. And if you look in volume 19 of the journal, you don't realize that in volume 20, the core agenda sort of say that there were certain symbols or words missing from an article. Of course, the archive does wholesale replacement of article version of this date with article version of that date, and one doesn't easily see what are the differences, but the point's well taken. This exists already, and indeed the digital form should enhance the ability to see what has changed.
The reviewing and abstracting services, of course, will be trying to keep track of that sort of thing most recently, but that's not the GDML.
you certainly have seen the declaration that the University of California has issued recently with 18 points about good practice, I mean, what they recommend. And again, among one of them, there is advising the author not to give away their copyright, you see? And you probably have read the others, so I would like to have your opinion about this declaration, which I think is a very important one. It's all the University of California, and there are 18 points that I cannot summarize here.
But I mean, at a personal level, I actually like very much the Declaration of California, but yeah, I don't know about everybody else. Just, yeah. But I personally do. I really like it.
So this is entirely consistent with some funding agencies in different countries. In Canada, for example, the Natural Sciences and Engineering Research Council requires that that research that's been funded by INSERC be made available without cost to readers. And so we're going through a period of change, obviously, that I think that the publishing industry is trying to figure out how to survive as we go through this, and the funding agencies that are paying for the research, realize that the model that we've been living under needs to change. And so I think Patrick's quite right that there's more to come. The specific question you asked, is this a move in the right direction? Absolutely, yes.
So if with no more burning questions, I'd like to make one announcement. Sorry. If there are no more burning questions, thank you. I'd like to make one announcement, namely that tomorrow from 10:45 in room 103 in this pavilion, we'll have a room in which those who wish to discuss and perhaps make further suggestions and see what can be done to further the efforts of producing a global digital maths library will be sorry, I didn't finish the sentence. There will be room for discussion there in 103 tomorrow. That's in this pavilion from 10:45. And I invite those interested to come to that. Now, because the next panel actually nominally starts in 10 minutes, we were asked to stop in 3 minutes in order to provide a little passing time. I'd like to emphasize that what we've been trying to do here, I think, is to point out that the efforts towards a global digital maths library are underway. We don't have one by any means yet. There are all sorts of changes happening, changes to the reporting of mathematics, changes to types of mathematics that are going to be done, changes to what the literature is. And we're looking at those as well as trying to provide access to the heritage literature that we all depend on because mathematics persists, as Stephen reminded us again. There are all sorts of considerations ranging from the forward-looking speculative considerations of trying to use our digital technology in interesting ways to get hold of the semantics which is there in machinable literature, to just trying to get together a corpus that people can access in a more traditional way, perhaps with better tools that are the result of digital technologies opportunities. It's a complicated business, but we're, I think, moving forward. And I'd like to ask the panel members if they have any final remarks.
I think you've summarized the state of affairs quite well, Patrick. the overall view is a massive undertaking. There are some specific problems that we have identified, and we've made some progress towards some specific problems that have been funded to be solved. And I think the next steps then are to develop the agreements with publishers and with and the architectural agreements in which participants can enroll in the activities of the International Math Library.
Well, I just wanted to say that I think what we expected from this panel was to get some feedback about the priorities or the interesting things among the things that have been discussed by the panelists or elsewhere, in order to better tune the way the IMKT is developing. And I think we completely missed that point. So if you have ideas regarding that, you can come to the date tomorrow. And if you want to discuss open access and current publishing options, etc., maybe you should ask for another room.